Defense mechanism. Defense mechanisms are ways of protecting ourselves when we have to deal with our unconscious wants, feelings, desires, impulses. In some ways, defense mechanisms actually act as a psychological shield against our anxiety or discomfort at these unconscious psychological processes. And defense mechanisms have actually been classified into several different categories. Repression. Repression is a psychological defense mechanism in which unpleasant thoughts or memories are pushed from the conscious mind. What does repression mean in psychology? In psychoanalytic theory, the exclusion of distressing memories, thoughts, or feelings from the conscious mind, often involving sexual or aggressive urge or painful childhood memories. Purpose of this defense mechanism is to try to minimize feelings of guilt and anxiety. How do you know if you have repressed memories? If you find yourself feeling triggered or having strong emotional reaction to people who remind you of previous negative experience. For example, might be someone who does not recall abuse in their early childhood but still has problems with connection, aggression, and anxiety resulting from the unremembered trauma. Next is sublimation. Sublimation is a defense mechanism, an unconscious psychological defense that reduces the anxiety that may result from unacceptable urge or harmful stimuli. Sublimation is usually considered a healthy and mature way of dealing with urge that may be undesirable or unacceptable, rather than act out in ways that may cause us or others harm. Allows us to channel that energy into things that are beneficial. How do you sublimate your emotion? Try any kind of creativity to sublimate your ideas, like poetry, songwriting, painting, and drawing, are just some of the ways that people channel their unwanted feelings and emotion into a more positive and beneficial place. How do you sublimate anger? The goal in sublimating your anger is to change that angry energy into something productive. For example, if you get frustrated while trying to figure out a difficult math problem, you can use the energy from your anger to redouble your efforts by focusing more carefully. Next is reaction formation. Reaction formation is a psychological defense mechanism in which a person goes beyond denial and behaves in the opposite way to which he or she thinks or feels. Conscious behaviors are adopted to overcompensate for the anxiety a person feels regarding their socially unacceptable unconscious thoughts or emotion. Reaction formation reduces anxiety by taking up the opposite feelings, impulse, or behavior. For example, treating someone you strongly dislike in an excessively friendly manner in order to hide your true feelings. Next is rationalization. Rationalization is a defense mechanism in which controversial behaviors or feelings are justified and explained in seemingly rational or logical manner to avoid the true explanation. Rationalization happens in two steps. 1. A decision, action, judgment is made for a given reason or known reason at all. 2. Rationalization is performed constructing a seemingly good or logical reason as an attempt to justify the act after the fact for oneself to others. Rationalization can be used to avoid admitting disappointment. For example, I didn't get the job that I applied for, but I really didn't want it in the first place. Second example, a student might blame a poor exam score on the instructor rather than their own lack of preparation. Now, what are the dangers of rationalization? Biggest danger is that rationalization makes it very hard to accept criticism and feedback from other people. How do you stop rationalization? To make yourself feel better and not feel guilty. To fix this, you have to remove emotion from your decision making. You need to base on logic rather than emotion because emotions will sway your decision towards one that aren't beneficial. Regression. Regression function as form of retreat, enabling a person to psychologically go back in time to a period when the person felt safer. Ego reverts to an earlier stage of development, usually in response to stressful situation. For example, regressive behaviors include tantrum, throwing, sucking thumb, bedwetting, and so on. Projection. Projection refers to unconsciously taking unwanted emotion or traits you don't like about yourself and attributing them to someone else. For example, a student who failed a subject blames his failure on poor teaching. Next is undoing. Undoing is a defense mechanism in which a person out or remove an unhealthy, destructive, or otherwise threatening thought or action by engaging in contrary behavior. For example, a man gives her wife a bunch of roses after their argument last night. In this defense mechanism, you try to reverse or undo your feeling by doing something that indicates the opposite feeling. Displacement. Displacement is a defense mechanism where emotions are directed away from their source or target towards something else. For example, boss gives his employee a hard time at work and the employee goes home and shouts at his wife. Why is displacement bad in psychology? It can cause an unintended chain reaction, displace aggression. For example, can become a cycle. Imagine an employee who is angry with their boss, now angry themselves. The spouse might be irritable with their children too. How can displacement be overcome? 1. Remain silent. Learn that there is no point in arguing, explaining, or defending. 2. Comfort yourself. And the last, speak with other person. Next is denial. Denial is one of the most common defense mechanisms. It occurs when you refuse to accept reality or facts. You block external events or circumstances from your mind so that you don't have to deal with the emotional impact. In other words, you avoid the painful feelings or events. For example, a smoker denies that his habit has negative health consequences so he can continue smoking. Denying there a problem, we don't have to feel bad about the fact that there's a problem. Unfortunately, this doesn't solve anything or make our life better. Next is conversion. Conversion in this pattern of defense mechanism is strong emotional conflicts which are not expressed are converted into physical symptoms. For example, a student nurse who is very anxious about her examination may develop headache. Next is dissociation. Trying to disconnect from the real world to defend from unbearable thoughts, feelings, and memories. For example, a person's ego avoids the fear caused by traumatic experience by disconnecting from the traumatized personality and living in another personality. Multiple personality disorder. Next defense mechanism is intellectualization. Is an attempt to avoid expressing actual emotion associated with a stressful situation by using the intellectual processes of logic, reasoning, and analysis. For example, a young professor received a letter from his fiancée, breaking off their engagement. He shows no emotion when discussing this with his best friend. Instead, he analyzed his fiancée's behavior and tried to reason why the relationship failed. Next defense mechanism is substitution, a adjustive mechanism in which original goals or desires are substituted by others. For example, a woman who failed the nursing board exam 3 times worked as a nursing aide just to be in the hospital. Last one is fantasy, dreaming, imagining instead of living in the present world because you don't feel competent to achieve pretending. For example, wanting to look good, pretending to yourself that you are one of the movie stars you read about, or making up stories about how successful you are rather than working on your success. The problem of this defense mechanism is you get stuck in the fantasy rather than using your talents to become successful.